Good morning, you guys. Today on Classic Mini DIY, the first thing we gotta do is deal with a problem that I just found out after getting some parts back from the parts washer. Specifically, my bell housing is cracked. Let me show you guys. Now, this is a little pile of parts I'm going to get welded. I'm going to get into that in a second, but what I want to show you guys is that my bell housing is cracked. You can see right here, it's cracked all the way through to the other side. Lift that up. And you can see cracked here as well. Now, for those of you that are welders, you probably know that welding cast aluminum is not the easiest thing in the world. And you also might ask, well, Colt, why don't you just use the original bell housing from your first transmission? And while I could do that, I would end up with issues with my idler gear being too big for the old bell housing, and realistically, it's just better. I want to keep all the parts together with the transmissions that I'm using them on. So what that means is I'm going to be visiting my friend down in South Carolina, and I'm going to see if he can weld that up for me. Hopefully we can get it welded. Worst case scenario, we can't, and I just got to get a new bell housing, but let's head on down there. He's also going to be doing some welding for me on some other stuff. I am doing kind of a conversion on my breather system to AN fittings. And so what that means is that this right now is just a hose fit. You put a hose over that breather system and then you clamp it down. Pretty simple. But what I want to do is use these AN fittings so that you screw on really tight, clean, braided lines onto these breathers. So I want to put one on the timing cover breather and then the other on the crankcase breather. So let's head on down there and get some stuff welded up, hopefully. All right, so I kind of forgot to film stuff while I was down there and he was welding. Sorry, folks. I know that stuff probably would have been pretty cool to see, but I can show you what we actually went down there and did. So I've got this old timing cover and it's not in the best shape, just to kind of level set here with you. The welds on it are kind of jank at this point. The bottom looks a little rough. It was a round breather that was converted into a flat breather so that it could fit really well on the Mini. But the way that the breather system used to work is that you would have a hose clamp onto this end right here, and that would run up to a PCV valve, where it would then ingest the blow-by and the different fumes and oils back into the system and reburn it. It actually wouldn't ingest the oils, but the PCV system actually prevents oil from going, but it allows air to pass by and into your intake and then get reburned by your system. But that whole system and the way it was set up had its limitations, and it was just kind of, I wanted to make it look tidier. I wanted it to look really, really nice. So what I decided to do is what's called an AN conversion, and AN is just a type of fitting. It's a really, really nice fitting that's used on pretty much every race car that's out there. It's various different sizes. You can get it for oil, fuel, air, all sorts of different stuff. But in my case, it's going to be an air-oil mixture that comes out of these breathers. These have some mesh inside to collect oil and keep the oil down inside, but oil still does make it past. And then this fitting right here is going to allow me to connect AN lines and run a really, really slick system. So I had my friend do this to the timing cover, and then I also had him do it to the breather that sits on your clutch housing. So this one sits on the clutch housing on the left side of your motor, and it mounts onto the bell housing. And so this plus the other one are going to get connected, and then I'm going to run it through a modern PCV system. So I'm actually not going to use the old PCV valve that I've got. The old one just took up a lot of space. The new one's inline. It's real slick. It's made for AN fittings. But don't worry, I'm not getting rid of the old PCV. It's going to hang around. It's not like I'm going to throw it away, but I'm not really going to use it on my car in the foreseeable future. But in addition to that, I also showed you guys at the beginning of the video that my bell housing, this is the bell housing that came off of the 998 that Justin is using on his Moke. And he didn't need this rod change box, which is how I got that. And this bell housing, or this transfer case, had a huge crack in it, and we're not really sure how it happened. Maybe the starter, but I showed you guys at the beginning of the video, and I went down to South Carolina. My friend was kind of nervous about welding this because welding cast aluminum specifically is kind of difficult, and by kinda, I mean it's like really difficult because cast metals generally have a lot more imperfections in them and all sorts of different stuff. So he was like, I'll give it a shot. I haven't really done it before, but I am absolutely blown away by the quality of his work. I mean, absolutely floored. So you can see here, this piece is kind of brushed down, it's smoothed out. The crack actually went from here all the way down to here, and this is all welded, and he did just an unbelievable job cleaning that up. And then the other side, we didn't do a whole lot of cleanup on, but you can see, and that gives you a better idea of how bad that crack was. I mean, it literally went down to here. So that's all welded up, and I'm able to save and salvage this existing bell housing or this transfer case, which I'm super excited about. I don't have to buy a new one. And then on top of that, we also tapped the top here because this didn't have a breather on it like 1275 motors do. The 998s, since they were lower displacement, actually didn't need a breather on the crankcase. But once you moved up to the 1275 motors, and in my case a 1293, it's definitely necessary. So this crankcase breather that has my new AN fitting on it fits right on top here, and then the blow-by and the gas gets routed out this and then back into the intake system. So it is looking really sharp. I'm really honestly just over the moon with how well this turned out. So now these are gonna get set aside, and it's time to do some stuff out on the car. I don't have a lot of parts that I've ordered right now, so there's a lot of stuff coming in. I've got stuff coming in from all sorts of places. Obviously, the majority of the parts are coming from my parts sponsor, 7 Mini Parts. If you don't know about them, check out the link in the description below. Awesome parts and great parts selection here in North America. But I also have some pretty exciting stuff coming from a race company called MED Engineering. And specifically, what I have coming from them is an aluminum alloy and steel toothed, I'm not really sure the correct way to say that, timing chain. I'm very, very excited about that. It's adjustable, so it's gonna make it really easy for me to degree my cam, the new cam that I'm putting in, and that is gonna lighten up that whole system. It's just gonna be slick. I can't wait to show you guys that. I won't go too deep into it today since I don't have it yet, but in time I will. And I'm also ordering some very specific transmission parts from Guessworks. Guessworks is a company that's been around since I started working on my Mini at least. I mean, I know they've been around much longer than that, but I remember them when I first started, and he sells all sorts of very specific parts for transmissions. The one I'm getting specifically is this retaining ring. This retaining ring sits and holds all of the gears kind of in place. And the final drive gear that I have, while it fit on my remote box, this retaining ring, too small, and that pinion gear can't actually fit inside there. So I needed a new one of those, as well as a lace shaft and some other kind of little things that I won't get into either. But today is all about removing the hubs, the wheels, the drive shafts out of the Mini as it sits now. It's just kind of been hanging out there for, I mean, like basically a month now. It's really starting to get sad seeing that Mini with no motor on the jacks and everything. But it's the name of the game, and until we get all the other parts and can start reassembling stuff and tidying up all of the paintwork underneath the car and on the motor, we got to do some more disassembly. So let's jump out there and I'll show you guys how to take the hubs off of your cars as well as taking the drive shafts out of those outer CVs. So let's get rolling. All right, so for those of you who have not done this job before, I just want to warn you that it is a messy, greasy job. And with the motor in, it's a lot of work, and you'll also likely lose all the oil that's in your car. So you're going to need a drip pan. I'm not going to dive into that only because I don't have my motor in my car. So I will just say, messy, needed a catch can. You're gonna need new oil if you aren't planning on reusing the old oil, which I don't think you should ever do. You should always put new oil in if you are draining out the oil. And other than that, this whole assembly is gonna have to come off. So I'll show you some special parts we're gonna need once we get into it. But for right now, let's loosen these bolts and pull the wheel off. All right, so now that we have that off, the next thing that we're gonna wanna do is really start taking apart the ancillary items on this whole front hub system. First of which is your disc brake caliper. If you've got drum brakes, it's a little bit different. You don't have to take a caliper off, but in my case, I've got disc brakes. So I'm gonna reach behind here, loosen the nuts on the back of this, and then I'm gonna get zip ties to tie this up to my radiator cowl up here so that that doesn't hang on the brake line itself, because we don't want any stress on those brake lines. So there we have it. We have the caliper itself off. There is a lot of grease down here, which makes me realize that my hub was really leaking grease off the back. But anyways, I am going to take a zip tie, which I have already got here, and tie this up. All right, so that is tied up there, just hanging and off of the brake line itself. The next thing that we're going to want to do is get this castle nut off, which is going to be pretty difficult considering the fact that this spins so freely. So that's definitely going to be a challenge. So I might actually have to take this off a different way, since this is all free and these nuts were not taken off when the car was in gear. What I think I'm actually going to do, I'm going to approach this a little bit differently. I'm going to come in, I'm going to separate this ball joint using a ball joint splitter. I'll show you that tool here in a sec. And you have to do that on the top and the bottom. Disconnect the rod ends from my steering rack so that that is free. And then we should be able to lift this out pretty easily. The spring probably has some tension on it, and this shock might have to come loose. We'll see. But for right now, let's go ahead and break those nuts off, and then we can move forward from there. Now with this nut, you're not going to want to take it all the way off, because the ball joint splitter, you're going to want to have the ball joint splitter kind of resting on the top of the bolt and the nut, and that'll keep it from just like collapsing out of the way. Now I'm pretty sure that I have shown how to use a ball joint splitter before in my videos, but as a quick recap, I don't recommend the fork kind that you hammer. I really prefer the kind where you have a bolt that screws in and allows you to tighten that down in a kind of a little bit slower and more controlled way. But what you do is you take the ball joint splitter. Well, my ball joint just came apart, so I don't have to actually show you how to use this. But the basic idea is that you have your ball joint splitter on top like this, where you have the top arm resting on the top nut and bolt. And then this underneath your top arm, in between the top arm and your ball joint, you tighten this nut up on the bolt that's part of the ball joint splitter. And then as it gets sandwiched down, this arm comes down and presses it and separates those. But I guess I've taken this off recently enough to where it wasn't totally locked up on there. The bottom one, probably not going to be the same case, but you apply that same method of removal to the bottom, and then you should be good. Have I ever told you guys how much I hate working on things with tension like this? Oh, God. Oh, see, that's why I don't like it, because they pop out. It's like a snake in a barrel or something. God, it startles me every freaking time. Anyway. So both ball joints are loose. The way that one worked is actually more similar to the way it's probably going to work on your car. Just most ball joints are stuck like that. I don't remember the last time I took apart the bottom side of mine. All right, so one thing I forgot while I was taking that apart is that I also need to kind of pop off this steering rack as well. That was still attached. So I'm using my ball joint splitter. I like this thing. It's slow, steady tension on this thing so that you can separate it. And there we go. That's disconnected. And now this whole hub assembly should come out pretty nicely. Out. And there you have it. So we have the disc, the full hub assembly, including the drive shaft that's attached on mine, as well as a terrible mess behind here. That thing, I can't believe that that wheel bearing was staying together. But that and the whole assembly. So I'm going to set this off to the side, but for right now, we're just going to leave that alone. We're going to do the same thing to the other side, and then I'm going to show you how to get this drive shaft off with the hub the way it is right now. We're going to have to get creative with this, that's for sure. All right, so as you can see here, I have my drive shaft clamped in the base of my bench vise where it has a pipe holder, and I am going to try and break this castle nut free. The first thing we need to do is take out the cotter pin that's right here. All right, cotter pin is out. Now we need to get our socket and loosen this sucker up. And if I remember correctly, yep, the socket that you need is Well, this is a 34. It's gonna work, but really you need a standard socket. This one's actually almost perfect, but realistically you need a standard socket. I think it's 1 inch, but I don't fully remember that, so don't quote me on that. And now we're gonna see if I can break this loose with simply a bench vise and a breaker bar. Oh my God, you guys, I am super lucky. And it looks like we lucked out. This is coming off, thankfully. These things are normally on there really tight, so that's great. That comes off like so. And then your disc comes off, and in this case, you can kind of see inside here. It's on a spindle, and that spindle is what has your wheel bearing on it. So you have this kind of special washer that gets, you don't want to lose that, that's important. And then from here, you should be able to loosen up this hub and slide that off, just like that. And so in this case, my wheel bearings are actually still inside this thing. I am going to take those off in just a second, but for right now, let's take this outer CV off of the drive shaft, because these drive shafts are for sale with my remote transmission, and it's kind of a whole kit. The new drive shafts for the CVs are going to be coming later. Now in my case, I'm not going to be reusing the CV boot, and as you can see, there's a lot of grease in here. This is a very messy job. But what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go ahead and cut that off, because I'm not gonna be keeping it. I'm going to be replacing it when it goes back on the car. So to do that, I've got my handy dandy box cutter. All right, so this outer CV, the way that this comes off is really you need kind of a firm hit with some sort of punch. So in my case, I've got this long punch here. I'm setting it at the base where the inner CV actually meets the drive shaft. I'm gonna take my hammer and give it a few good whaps. And really at that point, it should start to come off. In my case, I've got to put a little bit more effort into it. But in order to get this off, it needs to compress the C-clip that's inside this assembly on the actual drive shaft. It needs to compress it so that it can actually slide off of the end of the drive shaft. It's part of the safety system that actually keeps this from falling off or flying off when it's actually on the car. There we go. All right, so looks like just needed a bigger hammer. But as you can see, well, maybe you can't from up there. I'll bring you down here in just a second to show you this. So here you have your outer CV. This is the castle nut threading. This is where it mounts to the disc. And then this is where your wheel bearing actually sits. And then inside here is where your drive shaft slides into. And this allows pivot and movement so that when your drive shaft and your wheel goes up and down, there's play and movement in that. So this, if you're going to be reusing it, and in my case I am because I'm keeping discs on my car, I'm going to set this off to the side, and I'm also going to put this in a Ziploc bag because I don't want to contaminate the inside of this CV joint. I'm also going to pack the heck out of this with some grease once it goes back in. But for right now, I'm going to set it off to the side, and then I can show you guys a little bit closer this drive shaft so you get an idea why I had to hammer it off, for one, and how it gets held on. All right, so now we're down at the drive shaft, and what you can see here, and I'm going to use something to kind of point this out so I don't get all greasy again, but what you can see here, this is the retaining clip that keeps your whole outer CV system from sliding back that direction. These are the splines, obviously, that the outer CV sits on. And then this right here is the circlip that Tom at Total Car Reviews forgot to put on his drive shaft. Shots fired. And that is what actually holds your drive shaft into the outer CV. Now, when I was hammering, what it's doing is effectively forcing this C-clip to tighten back down and allow everything to slide off of these spindles. And that's the general gist of the way these drive shafts work on the outside. It's pretty simple. Now, one thing I want to call out is the differences between drive shafts. There are two different kinds. There's one that is used for the pot joints, the CV joints, and then there's the other one that is used for the Hardy Spicer and the U-joint system. I'm pretty sure that's correct. I'm sure that someone will tell me if it isn't. Please let me know. I think I have that correct. It's either that or the CV joints and the Hardy spicers go together. I just can't remember. But anyways, these drive shafts are going to be going with my remote transmission and those U-joints. And then I've got another drive shaft set that is going to be coming to me from Paul Jeffries, who is the one who's doing the diff, 4-pin diff for me. So I'm going to do this to the other side of the car. I'm not really going to show that to you guys because it's literally the exact same process. And then I'm going to show you guys what a single pin diff looks like in comparison to a 4-pin diff. All right, so the last thing I'm going to show you guys today is the difference between a single pin differential and a 4-pin differential, which is what I'm upgrading my car to so that I have a stronger drive system and it's less prone to failure. Now, all original Minis came with a single pin differential, and what that means is that there was a single pin extending between the two planetary gears in the differential. So you have this one pin and two planetary gears, and then you have your output shaft on one end, and then you have another output shaft on this end. And in this scenario, what would happen is you'd have your output shaft coming out this side, and then you'd have a final drive gear. Let's go ahead and hold this up so you have an idea. But then you have your final drive gear, and in this case, this is the crown wheel, and it's a 2.95 ratio. And the way that this works is your differential mounts on here, and obviously your output shaft gets mounted through this hole and out the side. Those two output shafts then go to your drive shafts and then to your wheels. So this spins and your wheels spin. And that's the kind of meat and potatoes of how this works. But the benefit of moving to a 4-pin differential is, one, you have two additional planetary gears. You'll be seeing a picture pop up in the corner here. This is actually the differential that Paul is making for me, and it's all done. That's actually on its way right now. But you have your two planetary gears. In the 4-pin diff, you actually have 4 single pins and 4 planetary gears to manage the movement of this other side of your differential. So what it does is that it prevents this kind of lateral kind of movement on your differential. And there's a lot to be said for that, because what ends up happening is you have just a much more robust system that is considerably less prone to braking and failure. So a 4-pin diff can allow more power to be delivered to your wheels in a safer way. Alrighty guys, that wraps up this episode of Classic Mini DIY. I'm really sorry, I know it was really short, but I just couldn't get a lot done today. Today is Saturday and it's kind of like my birthday weekend, so I'm gonna try and take it easy this weekend and not do too much work on the car. But I'm gonna be back at it next week, especially next weekend. I'm gonna have a lot of new parts in, and I'll be able to really start reassembling things, which is exciting. That's definitely my favorite part of getting a motor rebuilt and doing lots of fun stuff like this. We still have considerable amounts of work to do on the actual car. I've gotta treat the underside. I've gotta wire wheel all the rust off. It's gonna be a dirty, messy job. Not really looking forward to that part, but I just have to keep thinking about the end result and how it's gonna look when it's all done, and how I know I'll have peace of mind knowing my car is not gonna rust out or have problems in the future. But like any episode of Classic Mini DIY, if you have any questions, feel free to post them in the comment section below. If you like the video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel. I really appreciate it. It shows me you guys like what I'm doing, and it encourages me to keep going and doing these fun things for you guys and showing you on camera. But until the next episode, and until I see you guys again, enjoy those minis and motor on.